Hello, my friend. So I'm here today to talk to you about two-dimensional arrays. So this is a pretty exciting topic, and this would represent some kind of board like this, where you had not just one list of arrays, but kind of like a list of arrays. Like instead of just being one long row, you have rows and columns in your array. So what a 2D array is basically is it is an array of arrays. Now, we don't need to be too scared. The notation for this actually works out really nicely. So the way you would set it up is when you say you want to make a two-dimensional array, let's say of doubles, you do double, and then two sets of brackets. A equals a new array of doubles. And then what you do here, when you put the two entries in here for the length, you're going to put one for the number of rows and one for the number of columns. So remember that your rows go horizontally. Columns keep up a house. Columns, right, go up and down. So this is saying you have 1, 2, 3 rows, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So you put always the row first and then the column second. So that's how you declare on a 2D array. So the entire array A in this sense is going to look like that. So A is this giant thing. Now, inside that, we can think of individual rows, right? So the top row is like A sub 0. The second row is A sub 1. The third row is A sub 2. And within each of those rows, the columns are corresponding to individual entries. So we said this had 4 columns in each one. So if I wanted an individual entry, like say I wanted, this guy right here. So that's in row 1, column 0, 1, 2. So column 2. So that would be entry A sub 1 sub 2. You always do the row first and then the column again. So basically, the entire thing is your 2D array. If you wanted the individual row, that would be a 1D array. And then if you want an individual entry, that would just be an int. So just to kind of clarify this, right, like A is a 2D array. If I looked at a row, so row 1, so that'd be A sub 1, that is a 1D array of integers. And if you just looked at one particular one, say A sub 2 sub 3, that would just be a single int. So it's just an array of ints. Or doubles, I guess, in this case, as I define it. But whatever, it's fine. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about a couple things then as we set it up. But I wanted you to, so this is, again, the 2D array. This is the 2D array of, ints or doubles or whatever. And each row is a 1D array, and then each entry is an individual int. Okay, the next thing I want to do was actually go ahead and look at some code and what this is going to look like, how to set them up, how to work them. So let's go ahead and close this out and open up some code. Okay, so like I said, when you set it up, it's just like you normally would. Public static void main. Okay, so when you set up your 2D array of ints, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's make this int bracket A equals a new array of ints. And again, let's just say we have 3 rows and 4 columns. Now, one of the things you might be wondering is what would happen if we print out a dot length? Okay, go ahead and make a guess, and then we'll print it out and take a look at what happens here. And we see it is 3. So a dot length actually gives you not the number of entries in the entire thing, but it just gives you the number of rows. Okay. Now you might be wondering, well, that's great. How do I get the number of columns? Well, what if we want the number of columns? Well, let's think about that. So what I could do is I could look at an individual row, right? And I could ask myself, well, how many entries are there in that row? So maybe I'd look at row 0 and ask how many entries are in row 0. So I'd look at a row and ask how many entries in that row. So if I want to get the number of columns, what I do is I say, okay, I'm going to look at, I'm going to spell that correctly also. I'm going to do A sub 0 dot length. So what this is going to do, again, you look at row 0, it is the length of the 1D array, row 0. So you say, I'm going to look at one row, how many entries are in that, and that gives me the number of columns. And we'll see in this case, that's 4. As I spelled that wrong, which is awesome. Okay, we see it does give me 4. Okay, cool. So the next thing, of course, is how do we set up individual entries? So to set up individual entries, well, I can obviously do the same thing as before, right? I can set up, a sub 0 to equal 4. Okay. Or what if I want to set them all up at once? So that turns out to be pretty straightforward, hopefully. Just like we have one for loop, that works well with an array. If we have a 2D array, that works with two for loops, a nested for loop. So nested for loop goes with 2D arrays. So basically what we're going to do there is have one outer loop for the rows and then another inner loop for the columns. Okay, so if I want to go through the rows, I just set up a regular for loop. So for int, let's call it R for rows, C for column. So R is 0, R is less than, okay, the number of rows, that's a.length. And then we'll go through one at a time. So we'll do R++ like we're used to. And then inside that, we're going to do our loop for the columns. Oh, geez. I'm going to need the auto format here. So now I'll do for int C equals 0, C is less than, okay. So again, I'm looking for the number of columns. So I just look at row 0.length. You could also do a row R.length. So just say, okay, I'm in row R. How many entries are in row R? That would also work. I'll do a C++. Both of them will work just fine. Okay, this is bothering me already, so let's just go ahead and edit auto layout. Okay, so if I want to set them all up, maybe I want to set them all up to be 5s, because that's what your AP scores are going to look like. I can set up all values to be 5, so I can say I'm going to set up a sub r sub c, why does it do this, to equal 5. So that's going to set up each individual entry to be a 5. So that's how you can set everything up at once. Okay, but then say I want to like change one row. Say I want to change row 1 to all be the number 4. I mean, some of you might get a 4, but okay. So if I want to change row 1 to be a number 4, let's think carefully about that. So I'm saying, all right, I'm in row 1, so my row is going to stay the same, but my column is going to get looped through. So I'm going to loop through all the columns in row 1. So that, because I'm just looking at one row, I'm not doing a nested for loop, I'm just doing one for loop. So I'm just looping through the column, so int C equals 0, and C is less, okay, and the number of columns, again, is a sub 0.length. You gotta be really careful about whether you're going through the number of rows or the number of columns. Okay, so I want everything in row 1. So the row is 1, and C is the column. So I'm gonna try and set, a sub 1, so I'm in row 1, column C. So I'm looping through all the C's. So just like this says, okay, I'm going to go through row 0 and then all the columns. And then I go through the inner loop. Now rows 1, I go through all the columns again. Now rows 2, I go through all the columns again. So I'm doing the same logic here, but I'm just saying I'm in row 1 already. I just need to do something with column 2. And I'm going to turn all the columns, and I'm going to turn those to be 4. Okay. So that's the general setup for how we can set something up and how we can work with like one particular row or something. Okay, what else do I want to talk about? Okay, how do we print it out, right? So if we want to print it out just like a 1D array, it's not really going to like work if you just print out the whole array. So to print out, I have to print each individual entry. So that should be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to copy paste this loop, right? Anytime you're doing a nested loop, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to loop through every row, and then within that row, I print out the entry in each column. So I need to go ahead and just print out system.out.println. Okay, and that'll be a sub r sub c. And then maybe I want to put a space after it, and I'm going to do a print, not a println. So let's see how that'll work here and see if I can see my handiwork. And when I print it out, of course, it just kind of throws it out in 1. Now, what I want to do is now I want to say, okay, after I finish a row, after I go through all the columns, then I want to go down to the next line. We've seen a similar trick to this before. So after I finish printing out a row, I'm going to do a blank line. So here I'll do system.out.println and just print out nothing. So basically what that'll do is that'll say, okay, I'm going to go through and, okay, I print out everything. So I'm in row 0, column goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and now I print out a blank line. And now I go back here. Now row 1, column 0, 1, 2, 3, blank line. Now row 2, and I repeat like that. And we'll see that is actually going to make it look pretty nicely when I print it out. It puts it in that very nice format there. Okay, just a couple more things here. What if I want to change a column? So what if I want to change a column? Let's say I want to change column 3 to be all 7s. Okay, now let's see with that. So if I'm in the same column, so I'm going down the side, I need to loop through the rows. So I need to loop through the rows. So I'm just going to do a regular for loop. If I'm doing the whole array, I need a nested loop, but I'm just doing all the columns or all the rows. I just need one loop. So I'm looping through all the rows because my column is staying constant. So I'm starting at row 0, r is less than the number of columns, r plus plus. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set, a sub, okay, so I'm looping through the rows, keeping column is always 3. I'm going to set that to be 7. So that's why I would go ahead and do that. Okay. Now, the next thing you might be wondering, of course, can I have a method that inputs or outputs a 2D array? Obviously. Let's talk about what that might look like. Okay, so I'm going to write an example method down here, and then I'm going to show you how to call it in BlueJ, which is actually pretty nice. As you can guess, like setting these up, it's kind of a pain in the butt, especially if you just have to set up all the individual entries like this. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Say we have, okay, so I'm going to make this method is going to input a 2D array of ints and return a 2D array of booleans. It will be true in the location of any 5 and false for any other number. So if I send it like, 3, 4, 5, 2, I'm just looking for the 5, so I'm going to have that be false, false, true, false. So what I'm going to do is, let's see, it returns a 2D array of booleans. So it's going to be public static boolean, not an array, but a 2D array of booleans. And let's call it is5, and we're going to input, again, a 2D array of ints. So I got to do bracket, bracket, and let's call it nums. Okay. Now, my general setup for these for loops is the exact same every single time. So when I go ahead and write this out, like, okay, I'm going to loop through and do that. So I'm going to need to loop through a couple things here. So first off, let's clean this up a little bit. But again, yeah, feel free to copy paste this, right? Like your setup for looping through a 2D array is always the same. I loop through all the rows, and then I loop through looking within that row or within row 0, I loop through all the columns in there. Okay, now before I start, I actually need to set up the new array. So I'm going to set that up. So that's going to be a 2D array of booleans. Let's call it answer equals a new one. Okay, so it's going to have, I need to think about what I want to put in the same dimensions. It's going to have the same number of rows and columns as nums. So the number of rows is going to be nums.length. That's the number of rows and nums. And then the number of columns, so I'll just look in row 0 and get the number of entries in that row. So that gives me the number of columns. Okay, and now I'll just do this. If that entry, so if that entry in nub sub r sub c is a 5, then in that case, I'll go ahead and set that one in ants to be true. And in any other case or else, I'll go ahead and set that entry up to be false. Okay, cool. So that's the setup. So I'm looping through. I look through everything here. If it's a 5, I set that entry to be true. If it's not a 5, I set that entry to be false. And then, of course, I need to return my answer, that 2D array of booleans. Okay, now you might wonder how to test this. Like, you could test this in main. But the easy way is to use BlueJ. So what you're going to do is you're going to have, like, basically, you're going to put it in squigglies again. And you're going to have, like, here's row 1. Here's row 2. Here's row 3. And those themselves are rows, so those are going to be in squigglies also, right? So they're just 1D arrays, so it's going to look like this. Okay, so when I want to call this, I'm going to go ahead and do this. So say I want to call my is5. I have one squiggly for the whole array. Just be really careful with this. One squiggly for the top row. Let's say 2, 3, 5. And let's say I want the next row, so comma, and then a squiggly for the next row, 5, 5, 1. Okay, so in the top row, we should have a true in the last column. In the second row, or row number 1, I should have true in the first 2. So let's go ahead and run it and make sure. So obviously, it'll be the inspect. You're going to hit inspect again, and then you need to hit inspect on each of the rows. So this is row 0, and you can see it's false, false, true. Okay, and let's try row 1, true, true, false. That's what we expected, so that's good. So that's how you actually test these out. Anyway, so that's two-dimensional arrays. I hope this was helpful. I'll put the notes online like usual. And good luck with your labs. Have fun. I'll see you guys in class.